In this video, you will learn how to identify and correct sentence fragments and run-on sentences. In order for a word group to be a complete sentence, it must first have a subject, second have a verb, and third express a complete thought. A sentence fragment is a group of words that is only part of a sentence. Most of us can hear when a sentence is not complete, so the best way to make sure that you've written complete sentences is to read your writing out loud. This is going to help you pick up on the places where you may have unintentionally created a fragment. When they're not anchored to an independent clause, both phrases and dependent clauses, also known as subordinate clauses, are technically sentence fragments. Verbal phrases, such as participles, gerunds, and infinitives, are easily mistaken for sentences because they contain a word that looks like a verb. Here's an example with a participial phrase. The student's interested in photography. I have a word that looks like a subject, students, and one that looks like a verb, interested. But this doesn't express a complete thought. Something is missing. There are a couple of ways to fix the sentence, and you're always going to use the context, the surrounding sentences, to make the decision of what the most effective way to revise would be. Here, the easiest way is to stick in a helping verb. The students were interested in photography. This is something that I'm often telling my students. One of the reasons we know that a participial or a participial phrase is not an actual verb in the sentence is because it's missing the helping verb. So by dropping the helping verb back in, we are creating a complete sentence. This might not be what you want to say, though. Maybe you're using this interested in photography to add complexity to another sentence. So you complete the thought. Sorry, students is the subject here and were is the verb. Here's another way to fix it. The students interested in photography should take digital darkroom. So I have a subject, students. I have a verb, or verb phrase, should take. Interested in photography now functions as a participial phrase describing students, which is really what it was doing in the participial phrase fragment error above. Here's an example with a gerund phrase, selecting courses for the upcoming school year. Okay, by itself, we can probably hear that it doesn't sound complete, even though it looks somewhat long. A couple ways to fix this. The easiest one is to add on, complete the thought. Selecting courses for the upcoming school year was really difficult. In this case, the entire gerund phrase is my subject, and was is my verb. The infinitive phrase, to have so many choices for electives. Again, we can hear that right now because it's by itself, but if it were in the context of a writing, maybe we accidentally put a period somewhere before it, and we weren't aware that we were creating it, we have to read our writing out loud to pick up on this. Just like the other two types of verbals, complete the thought. What else do you want to say about this? To have so many choices for electives was a nice problem to have. As an example, the subject is the infinitive phrase itself, and the verb is was. Subordinate clauses are also, maybe even more often, mistaken for sentences because they contain a subject and a verb. They do not, however, express a complete thought, usually because subordinate clauses have an extra word in them that makes them be subordinate, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. Let's look at the adjective clause, which is my favorite color. Of course, if which is capitalized and there's a question mark at the end of the sentence, then you do have a complete sentence because the which is functioning as the pronoun and it's the subject. But I don't have those things. That's not what's happening here. I need to finish the thought. The water bottle was teal, which is my favorite color. Again, just one of many ways you could fix this error. Water bottle is the subject, was is the verb, and the underlined phrase, or sorry, clause describes teal. That's what makes it an adjective clause. Here's a noun clause, how I finished the book in one day. Complete the thought. I don't know how I finished the book in one day. So here the subject is I, the verb is know or do know, and how I finished the book in one day is a noun clause functioning as the direct object of know. You'll notice in both of these cases, in the adjective clause and the noun clause, there are verbs there, is and finished. There's a subject, I finished. but it doesn't express a complete thought because of the word how. That's what makes it depend upon some other clause, independent clause, in order for it to be a complete sentence. Here's an adverb clause, because I love pomegranates. Complete sentence, because I love pomegranates, I put some in my salad. Again, it's a matter of finishing the thought. Attach the modifying clause to an independent clause to make it a complete sentence. I actually love this example because my students always say this. First, subject, verb. My students always say, wait, I thought I couldn't start a sentence with because. And this is a lie that teachers tell younger students because they don't want them creating sentence fragments. So they just tell them you can't start a sentence with because. This is patently false. You can start a sentence with because as long as you attach an independent clause to it to create a complete thought. So if it's functioning as a subordinate clause attached to an independent clause creating a complex sentence, then you're fine. You can start the sentence with because. Revising sentence fragment errors. Most fragments, as we've seen, can be corrected by adding an independent clause to the fragment. Finish the thought with some kind of complete sentence. Fragments usually occur when the writer is being careless. More often than not, the information in a fragment can be combined with an adjacent sentence because that's when we're creating them anyway. We're kind of just writing as we're thinking, and we keep adding information, and we maybe end a sentence and then think of more information. So when we're revising, we want to figure out where's the best place to put that information and how do I punctuate it so I avoid creating some of these errors. Here's a style tip. Sometimes sentence fragments are okay. I call them purposeful sentence fragments. That indicates there's intention behind the creation of it. This will allow you to create variety in the length and structure of your sentences. A really well-placed purposeful fragment can be really dramatic. It can slow readers down and get them to pause over what you're saying. For this to work, the fragment must be very obviously intentional, which is why short phrases and single words work best. Now let's take a look at run-ons, which is kind of the opposite problem of the sentence fragment. A run-on sentence is when you have two or more sentences that have been written as one sentence, so basically they haven't been punctuated correctly. There are two main kinds, the fuse sentence and the comma splice. The fuse sentence occurs when the writer has joined two or more sentences and hasn't put any punctuation between them. Pizza is my favorite food. I ordered some for dinner last night. Again, we should, if we're reading carefully, be able to hear that I've really got two sentences here, which is why, again, this is usually a matter of not proofreading carefully. The comma splice is actually more common than the fuse sentences. This occurs when the writer has joined two or more sentences with only a comma to separate them. A comma by itself is not strong enough to join two independent clauses. You need something else with it. Pizza is my favorite food. I ordered some for dinner last night. It's not a long enough pause. So there are a few ways that we can revise a run-on sentence. The first is to figure out where you've got the two sentences where they break and just put a period there. Maybe you want to show a closer relationship, which is why you would put a semicolon in. You could add a comma in a coordinating conjunction, otherwise known as fanboys, to create a compound sentence. And finally, you could create a phrase or dependent clause from the information in one of the independent clauses. So in other words, your comma splice really is two separate sentences. Take some of the information from one of those, what's most important, make it into a phrase or a dependent clause and attach it to an adjacent independent clause. Okay, let's try it out. Determine whether the following word groups are fragments, complete sentences, or run-ons. Revise any errors that you find. Take a moment to pause the video, and then I actually go through some possible revisions on the upcoming slides. So you'll want to restart it to hear what some of my suggested responses are. Number 1, although many people enjoy spending time with their families on vacation. Once again, if we read it out loud, we can probably hear that it's not a complete thought, but it's a little confusing because it has a subject and a verb, and many people base their idea of whether or not something is a complete sentence on how long it is, and that's also just wrong. So reading aloud is key. How could we fix this one? Well, one thing you could do is just delete although. Many people enjoy spending time with their families on vacation, but it looks like we're wanting to set up some kind of contrast. So what we're probably going to do is attach an independent clause that shows that contrast. Number 2, the last vacation I took was to Florida. We went to Disney World and Universal Studios. Here we have a fused sentence, run-on. I really have 2 separate sentences here. There are a couple ways to fix this. I could use a period after Florida. I could do a semicolon between the 2 sentences. I actually prefer the last option I'm going to show you, which is to take the information in the second sentence and kind of push it into the first one. The last vacation I took was to Disney World and Universal Studios in Florida. It ends up overall being a little bit more concise, which is something that we also want to be working on in our writing. Number 3, my younger brother, who does not have children, decided to come with us. This, by reading out loud, maybe even just by seeing it, you should be able to tell is a complete sentence. The who does not have children is not a complete sentence. That would be a fragment. It's an adjective clause describing brother, but because it's been attached to an independent clause, it works. And finally, 4, the kid's exhausted from their trip. Again, we can probably hear it. There is a subject and what looks like a verb, but this is another example of having a participial phrase, so not a complete sentence. So a couple ways to fix it, just like we looked at before. I could add the helping verb. The kids were exhausted from their trip. If I'm trying to express something slightly more interesting or meaningful, then I'm going to add an independent clause. The kids, exhausted from their trip, slept the entire way home. So now, exhausted from their trip is clearly, correctly functioning as a participial phrase that modifies kids. Our subject is kids, and slept is, of course,